Within this video, I am providing a demonstration on how to create a value scale with the color blue. You can see that I have measured out 10 inches for my rectangle that is holding my 1-inch squares, which will be containing the various values of blue that I will be applying to my value scale. You'll notice that as I start with this process, I am mixing my white directly into that blue on my palette so that I can create a very light version of that blue. A blue that's so light that it almost feels relatively close to white. So I'm just going to keep mixing this until I get a very light version of it, and I'm going to apply this light blue that I made with my brush very carefully and slowly along the edges of the first 1-inch square. You'll notice that as I'm doing this, I'm really taking my time. I'm applying along the edges of my graphite, making sure that I'm keeping my hand as steady as I can. As I continue, I'm going to go ahead and pull from a little bit more blue just to deepen that value. Once I do this, I'm going to go ahead and move back into my value scale and apply that deeper value of blue. So you can see a difference between the second value from the first. I'm going to continue adding blue to create an even deeper version of that value. Now, as I continue, I'm going to gradually bring black into the mix. In doing so, I'm going to create an even deeper version of that blue, making sure that I'm being very careful with not using too much black, but just creating a darker value with that black. Continuing onward, I'm going to keep incrementally adding black to the blue that I have on my palette. One thing that's important to remember about this process is that you don't want to add too much black too early. Black has a way of really canceling out a color if you're not careful, so it can really help to make sure that you're applying trace-like amounts as you're incrementally deepening that blue with your black. I'm going to continue this process until I get to the very end of my value scale, and the closer I get to the end, you're going to notice that the blue becomes very, very deep as a value, so deep that it almost reads as a black. The intensity of these values can have a bit of a range. Yours doesn't necessarily have to be as dark as mine as it gets to the end, but a general good rule of thumb is making sure that you are incrementally moderating your palette, either with your white at the beginning as well as your black at the end. This is going to ensure that by the end of the process, the values are going to feel separated enough so that you can have a clear sense of where your lightest light is happening at the beginning of your value scale and where the darkest dark is happening near the end of your value scale. One thing to remember is that you don't want to use too much water. You'll notice that as I'm pulling from water every so often, I'm not bringing a lot of it into my value scale because I want the body of the paint to really do the work for me. That's going to ensure that the color that I'm laying down is relatively opaque and clean, and that I'm not going to have a lot of residual water puddling up my paper and getting in the way of my craft. Finishing this last square up, again, I'm going to really press the edges of my brush along those sections of the graphite that I laid down at the beginning of this process, and ensure that that last square is as clean as it can possibly be. And there we have our value scale. The goal of this assignment is to teach you how to create a range of lights and darks with a single color. As you could see with what we have, at the very start of our value scale, we're starting with a light version of our color, incrementally darkening it as we go with our blue, and then gradually adding trace amounts of black to arrive at a value near the end that is significantly darker than the value we started with.